Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Front page is football, football, football and football, but there are other stories. Here's the Sunday Telegraph. If you turn it over, they've got Brexit story here. Jacob Rees-Mogg looking pensive and worried, as he does so well, and an extraordinary story about fears that Trump may pull all US troops out of Europe. It's going to be a really, really interesting summit, that. But as I say, football, football, football. The Observer has May's EU deal under fire from business and hardline Brexiters. The Sunday Times has gone with an entirely football front page like that, but they've got more Brexit inside. Much to talk about there. Semi-gods, says the Sunday Mirror. Not a bad pun, I suppose. Yes, says the Sun on Sunday, and so on and so forth. One last political story. The Mail on Sunday, Boris in 4-letter attack on May. A slightly unpleasing image he has come up with, which we will discuss in a moment. But let's start with all of those Brexit stories, James.
So the Mail on Sunday has a kind of great write-through of what happened at Chequers, including Boris Johnson's colourful description of the deal, which wasn't particularly complimentary to it.
We'd better talk about that. He said it was polishing a turd.
Yes, indeed. Or he said the deal was like a turd, but there were some expert turd polishers in government who might be able to try and sell it to the public. And I think this is the kind of question here, which is, how much does this Tory disquiet about the deal, where does it go? It is quite clear that the Leave cabinet ministers want to make clear their reservations here. In the Mail on Sunday piece, we learned that Michael Gove is saying the deal was the pragmatic response to where we are now because of a lack of no-deal planning and the lack of a parliamentary majority.
So not perfect, but the best we can get.
Yes, exactly. And I think this is the question, which is, how many people are prepared to accept that, given where you are now, this deal is OK, even if it's not what they want, and prepared to think about kind of Brexit 2.0 in the future, kind of fixing this deal later down the road? Or how many people respond like the kind of farmer when asked for directions, saying, well, I wouldn't start from here?
It's interesting, though, in the Mail on Sunday that the Brexiteers are hopping mad, but there's talk about leadership challenge, letters being submitted. And I just feel we've heard about that a lot,
so
and
many
nothing's
times
happened.
before. It's the Grand Old Duke of York military tactic guidebook, isn't it?
Perhaps it might this time.
It is indeed, yeah. And it's been interesting, hasn't it? It's been notable how few Brexiteers have been very vocally against this. And the Remainers have kind of taken control of this weekend quite a lot.
You're chairman of the lobby, and big, big moments in Parliament next week. I mean, Theresa May addressing the 22 committee of Tory MPs tomorrow, I think.
That's tomorrow, yeah.
And then the trade bill coming back to the House of Commons, where this may, of course, be debated.
Yeah, so I think this week we've got the 22 committee, and we'll see these arguments being played out behind the scenes mostly. I think in terms of lobby, we're going to be focused on the Trump visit on Friday as well. But looking ahead to the next week, we've got the customs, we've got the trade bills, the Monday and the Tuesday, and that's when it will all play out in the open in the Commons chamber, and we're going to see whether this deal has calmed down any potential rebellion there.
Well, James, quite a lot of people will be asking, why haven't these people resigned? What's the answer?
Well, their problem is essentially this, which is they would prefer a deal based on the kind of Canada-EU free trade deal. The problem with that is incompatible with what Theresa May signed up to on the Irish border in December. So that would require hiving Northern Ireland off, which would be very difficult in any circumstances. But when you are reliant on the DUP for your majority in Parliament, it is obviously impossible. If you go back on those commitments you made in December, you're getting into no-deal territory. And it simply isn't feasible to get the country ready for no deal, because there haven't been the preparations made by March 2019. Because obviously no deal would mean no transition period.
Cathy, we saw the editor of The Sun, I think, at one point, going in to see Theresa May just before all this is announced. How well has that done for her?
Well, not very well at all. I mean, the Sun headline, stitch up. I mean, they're absolutely furious. Furious particularly with the big gun Brexiteers, as they put it, who caved in and backed the plan for a soft Brexit. And then they also have it in for the Remainers, who they thought would switch to a Brexit, who turned out to be, quote, all talk and no trousers, which is about the biggest insult in the Sun that you can imagine. But I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the turd polishers, if I could use that word again, the spin doctors that Boris has got it in for, have been out in force in all the newspapers. So we see this joint article written by Michael Gove, who you've got on your programme shortly, and Greg Clark, which is quite a strange sort of feat, really, because they're from other sides, you know, from opposite sides of the debate.
It's a bit like having a Tory and a Labour leader speaking in the same voice in the same article.
It is,
almost.
and also they speak in lots of different voices because it's a first-person article and they slip into the third person, so it's slightly strange. But it is, this is sort of cakeism, isn't it? I mean, they're trying to have their cake and eat it, as Boris Johnson said.
Is there an overall sense in the papers today that this has been a good week for Theresa May and she has pulled off something that people thought she couldn't pull off?
I think it is, and I think you could see from the way they handled it, Number 10 on Friday, it was all embargoed till 9 o'clock. The cabinet ministers had their phones removed, so all we got was Number 10's version of it at 9 o'clock. And nobody has come out to really criticise it. And all those photos of her looking very commanding and in charge.
She's faced them up. I mean, there's some extraordinarily aggressive government briefing about, you know, ambitious and self-indulgent ministers having to toe the line and so forth.
But will she sack any of them?
Well, we'll see.
We'll have to see.
I think this is, Cathy hits on a key question here. One of the things that she has said is that collective responsibility has been reasserted. But I think as today's papers remind you, there's a massive difference between, you know, people can in public toe the line, but let it be known their reservations. You know, that is the question. How aggressive is she prepared to be about policing that policy of collective responsibility? And also, I think, if you look at this story on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph, that you know, as her own MPs say to her on Monday night, oh, this isn't quite what we wanted, we want this change, that change, will she hold back? And what happens when Brussels comes back asking for more?
Let me give you all an example. Not that long ago, when Airbus and other companies were lobbying very aggressively, Boris Johnson said to the Belgian ambassador, F business. And he didn't deny it, that was reported, he didn't say that he hadn't said it. If he says that again, he can't stay in this government, can he?
I don't see how he can, after given what she said. But I don't see how he can be that restrained, because Boris is Boris and he does say things behind closed doors, and if there's a dictaphone on, then that's it. But it has to be curtains for him next time, surely.
Well, also, what about the quote in the Mail on Sunday, which I won't repeat? I mean, will action be taken on that? But then,
that was during the course of this meeting,
okay,
I suppose. So in a sense, it's been discounted already. Can I move on to the next really big story? In other weeks, we will be obsessed by the Trump visit that's about to break on all of our heads. And there's all sorts of stories about Trump. But as I said, there's fears that he is going to call on all British troops, I keep saying British, all American troops to be removed from Europe unless the EU signs up, and all the NATO countries sign up to higher defence spending. So that's a very, very dramatic threat.
It is a very dramatic threat. But I think some of the European members of NATO have had this coming. I mean, obviously, Donald Trump is taking this in his typical way to the nth degree. But this American frustration with Europe's refusal, the refusal of most European countries to spend the 2% on defence, has been there under Obama, it was there under George W. Bush. You know, there is a real problem here, which is that the Americans say, well, why should we spend more money than you do to protect your continent?
Defending wealthy countries.
Yes.
Who've got their own.
And I think I think the Trump relationship with Germany is fascinating. It is Germany that he is most cross with about this. Because since the 1980s, Donald Trump has had this view that Germany is taking advantage of America, that Germany is a rich country that has a trade surplus with the US, but it's the US that is paying to defend Germany.
Yeah. OK, Cathy, a lot of people up and down the country are starting to talk about a balloon that's going to be floating above the air above Westminster when Donald Trump arrives, and it's basically Donald Trump as a great big orange baby.
It is.
Some people think this is juvenile, silly politics, a way of insulting our closest ally, and some people go, yeah, it's exactly what we should be doing.
There's a complete divide. I mean, you have Rod Liddle in the Sunday Times saying this is a mass toddler tantrum by people who cannot bear to hear views that diverge from their own half-baked opinions. And, I mean, he goes on there, it's an expensively choreographed display of virtue signalling by the perpetually outraged, well-heeled and intellectually challenged liberal middle class. So, I mean, that's classic Rod Liddle. And then you've got Barbara Ellen in The Observer, who says it's childish, pointless and absolutely brilliant. And I think there's something that, if you think about, you know, Americans love the sort of idea of British quirkiness. I mean, this is British quirkiness, isn't it? You can't get more quirky than that. But, I mean, how much of it will Donald Trump see? He's going to have a sort of hermetically sealed visit. He's not really going to come into contact with the protests, but you suspect he will be watching it on TV.
And he's going to Scotland for longer than was expected, with the happy and naive belief that in Scotland perhaps he's very, very popular. You may find that's not true.
No, I think there'll be a fair few protests in Scotland. I remember this picture from last time, somebody rubbing a balloon over his hair going all static, so maybe that'll happen.
He's basically coming to play golf, though, let's be honest.
Exactly. Two other stories we must touch on. We just heard in the news that there's another drive to rescue these kids trapped in the Thai cave. It's an extraordinary, nail-biting story.
Yeah, it's horrendous to think about. Them being trapped there for over 2 weeks now, and you see in the papers today the letters that they've written to their family as well, talking about how I'm sorry we're here and it's cold and
the rain is coming.
And the rain is coming. So the race is on to get them out. But obviously these kids don't even swim, let alone dive. So it's about getting them out safely, and it looks very treacherous, so I think
I'm not usually a big fan of graphics in newspapers, but these are really useful graphics because they show you just how hard and how horrible it's going to be to get them out. They have to swim up a very, very narrow tunnel. It gets tighter and tighter and tighter. They go to a kind of cliff edge in the air, and then they have to dive back down again. So not only do you have to swim, you have to be very, very brave and very relaxed.
Yeah.
And if they panic, they're finished.
And it says here the narrowest section is just 15 inches wide, the equivalent of 3 Mars bars laid end to end. It's quite incredible.
It's lovely, though, isn't it? The sort of heartwarming thing about it is that you've got Elon Musk and, people offering World Cup final tickets when they finally emerge, let's hope. I mean, there is something that everybody's sort of pulling together and descending on this tiny little location up the mountains, that, there is something heartwarming about what we hope will be a successful...
All right, you mentioned the words. On to the inevitable. Who was watching the football yesterday?
Yes. We were all watching.
It was our lead story. I was at work. I had an excuse.
No, great stuff, isn't it?
So it was an extraordinary game. As somebody who doesn't understand all the delicate interstices of football strategy and so forth, it did seem to me it was great drama. Both our game and also the Russia-Croatia game that followed it, where we had one guy, this extraordinary guy who's only Russian by presidential decree of President Putin, scores a fantastic header and then misses the crucial goal in the penalty shootout.
I think an England-Russia semi-final would obviously have had all sorts of geopolitical overtones in the current circumstances.
I'm kind of glad it's not going to happen, I have to say.
Yes, I think there's an element of that. I think what is just astounding about this is how many people are watching. And you just these wonderful pictures in the sun that just show how deserted everywhere was. There's 32 million people sat down to watch the football. It really is one of those things when you can almost feel the country, England, coming together.
Yeah,
and one final thought about Gareth Southgate as a kind of new national icon, a different kind of leadership than we're used to, perhaps.
I think people are really enjoying seeing a kind of decent, grounded, unshowy person in charge, quietly getting on with the job, putting a team together without certain showmen. It's a real team effort, and I think people are really appreciating that.
And they seem like such nice guys, all of them. There speaks the non-football expert, but I mean, they're a team to emulate.
They're not showing off. Thanks all very much indeed. We were watching the football with the blinds down because it was so extraordinarily hot out there.
Let's take a look at what's leading the Sunday papers. And guess what? All the front pages feature the England football team, as you'd expect, but also a fair bit of politics there as well. Here's the Observer. It says that Theresa May's EU deal is coming under fire 2 directions, business and Brexiteers. The Mail on Sunday leads with Boris Johnson's colourful description of the Chequers Brexit deal. While the Sunday Telegraph has a warning from MPs that a bad Brexit deal could cost the Tories power. Here's the Sunday Times. It has an interview with the Prime Minister in which she says it's time for Brussels to get serious. The Sunday Express goes with the football fetching waistcoat, describing it as happy and glorious. And the Sun leads with simply yes. I think that's how you pronounce it. Well, joining me to discuss all of that, the Conservative London Assembly member, Sean Bailey, and the writer and commentator, my good fellow. Very good morning, guys, and thank you for dragging yourselves out of your bed after an historic England victory. Let's crack on. We maybe talk about that in a little while, but clearly the big story of the weekend, Maya, that deal struck at Chequers. Didn't look like we were going to get there. This is the front of the Observer.
Yeah, it didn't, and I think actually Theresa May's managed to survive all of this so far to some extent. But what we're seeing in the Observer today is these kind of two sides of this whole debate. There's entrepreneurs and business people who are saying this doesn't look so great. We don't think this is going to be a particularly good deal. And then you have these really arch Tory Brexiteers who seem like they're going to be very, very unhappy with this as well. And I actually think it really remains to be seen what this is going to look like. We'll see the white paper later in the week. But my concern really is how much of this is actually about keeping the Tory party together and what is actually going to be best for Britain. It doesn't really look like the Conservatives are caring about that right now. And I think also we should be really, really careful of just focusing on Brexit. What we're also seeing in The Observer is announcements that there's been big cuts to programmes on, for instance, tackling with smoking and tackling poor diet. So whilst the Tories are saying they're putting into the NHS, actually what we're seeing is a reduction in spending on some of these key areas and the stuff Jeremy Corbyn was talking about buses. These are key domestic issues that are rumbling along whilst the Tories are really ignoring them to focus on their own civil war around Brexit. It's very, very concerning, I think.
I mean, I see you nodding there, Sean. I mean, do you concede that at least to an extent what happened on Friday at Chequers was about the Prime Minister shoring up her authority, getting her more recalcitrant members of the Cabinet into step with her?
I think what you've seen here is Theresa May try to keep the country together. What's important about Brexit is leave or remain. I think we're over it now. We just want it to end. But what's
Andrew Adonis isn't.
But again, but what's interesting about this story is what's not in it. Where is Corbyn on this? Corbyn has been very quiet about Brexit because he has equal civil war going on in his own party. Because what Labour will understand is, although the proportion of the vote was similar, what was wildly different was the seat layout. So we all talking about the Prime Minister under pressure, but so is Corbyn. Many of his MPs could go missing if the deal isn't perceived as a good thing.
But what I do actually think is interesting about all of this is Theresa May has talked a very big talk on Brexit and, you know, how we will be leaving the EU. And actually, you could argue to some extent she's following Labour's lead. Labour have actually been criticised a lot for their Brexit position. But actually, it's been very clear for some months now about exactly what the leadership wants. And what we're seeing now is, you know, to some extent, her following their lead.
The whole Labour leadership are in a completely different place between themselves. I don't think Labour can argue that they've got a clear Brexit deal in their mind.
Just in terms of this deal and the relationship between the Cabinet and the backbenches, actually, if you look at some of the people that have come out in support of this, Michael Gove has been doing the rounds, the head of Vote Leave. Douglas Carswell, of all people, it seems to be pretty sanguine about all of this. If you think back to before they even announced that there would be a referendum, you know, people weren't talking about coming out of the single market and the customs union. We were looking towards Switzerland and Norway as potentially models that we might follow in future. So, I mean, this is closer to that than the hard Brexit, which some in your party want.
I've got to say, for me, Theresa May has done really quite well to survive up to this point. This is another big test for the actual white paper, which is important for the detail and also for the PM herself. If and when the PM gets past this, I think she will be past it, and then we can concentrate on our domestic agenda, which I do think is missing to a slight degree. But in the background, the party has done a lot of work on that. Even if you look at the NHS, to talk about the extra money, the detail will be coming on that as well. I do think it's there, but the nation is obsessed with Brexit, so we do need to get it dealt with.
I mean, what do you make of the way in which this will, the way in which we will view kind of Theresa May's authority in the aftermath of this, Maya? I mean, ahead of that Chequers summit, I mean, I've lost count of the number of times there have been reportedly threatened resignations, but David Davis fell into line. Boris Johnson called it a turd and then kind of fell into line. Liam Fox has fallen into line. I mean, is she back in charge now?
I think it really remains to be seen what will happen over the next week. But I also think we need to remember that a lot of people in this country, they are interested in Brexit. They're also interested in what is going on in their own communities, their own access to healthcare, their own bus services. So Theresa May's strength in those areas doesn't look so great, actually, because the domestic agenda is so poor. So, of course, Brexit does matter. But most people are feeling the effects of very terrible Tory cuts that have happened over the past 8 years in their communities. And so I think she looks very weak in that sense.
Not to make the political point, but we hear a lot about Tory cuts, but we do not ever talk about where they came from. We had a Labour Party who utterly devastated our economy and our
to be fair, you did talk about them quite a bit.
It's also quite incorrect, I think.
Forget about that. People talk about these cuts as if they just came out of the...
I didn't expect to hear a Conservative politician suggesting that they hadn't been talking about the black hole in Labour
Exactly so.
I do want to move us on, though. The story in the Times, and frankly, this will be one that we will be following very closely here on Sky News today. Those poor 12 boys and their coach trapped in the caves, and it appears that the operation to bring them out has now begun, and we all keep our fingers crossed.
I mean, this story is absolutely terrible, or it could be great. It's all about the resolution we get here. Just for people who haven't been following this, 12 boys from a football team and a coach, they went on a walk, went into a cave, the cave filled with water, now they're trapped. They've been there for 9, 10 days, and for a long time. The real scary part of this, if you read deeply, a trained, retired Navy SEAL diver tried to get to them and he died on the way out. It's a 5-hour dive. There's a British diver there trying to help get these boys out of this cave. What's really important, they're having to train the boys who are now weakened because they've been underground for so long to make this 5-hour dive. I worry for them, but I'm hopeful. I see that the Thai authorities are focused on this. I see they have some expertise, and I just hope and pray they can get them out.
I mean, I remember when I got the alert suggesting that they were still alive, and everyone's hopes obviously broadened at that point. But it looks to be an incredibly difficult operation to actually get them out of there.
Yeah, and I think that this is the problem, is that they've been exploring many different options about how to get them out, and there isn't a clear direct route that is going to be incredibly safe. So I think that actually there are a lot of problems with this. It is very, very hopeful. We should be very hopeful that they're all still alive, and just hope that they can figure out a way, bring in all this expertise from around the world. Actually, what we're seeing is a collaborative global effort on this, led by the Thai authorities, that should hopefully reach a positive resolution.
Do you know, the one thing that I take some solace from is the fact that actually, do you know what? 12 young men who can't swim, managing to survive for that length of time and still having the good spirits to write a note home to mum and say, look, I hope you're celebrating my birthday, don't forget about it, and please can I not have as much homework when I get out of here. If they've got that kind of fortitude, this could all end well.
I really hope so. And if you read deep and you talk about their football coach, he's well respected, he's an ex-Buddhist monk. He's written to the parents to say he's really sorry for causing this distress, but the parents have written back and said, please don't feel responsible. And what I really like about this, everybody's trying to help him focus on keeping those boys strong and ready for their really arduous task. He's been meditating down there with them to get them in the right frame of mind to do this. But I must stress, this is still at best 50-50. The dive that they'll have to make is really hard if you're a trained diver. For boys who can't swim, this is going to be incredibly tough, and I just pray that they can make it.
Let's turn to, oh goodness, the Sunday Mirror, and I'm not doing this in being churlish. Do you know what? I sat with my friends yesterday, watched the game, I got caught up in it. This is the Mirror's take on it. A new England. And actually, do you know what? That line there, it couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of guys. Do you know, there's more than a grain of truth to that, isn't there?
Yeah, and I've got to say, I'm not really into football. I'm not massively fussed. But I do think there is something, it's something that Gareth Southgate has said himself, that this is a team that represents modern Britain and all of its diversity. They seem to have a very, very good cohesive team. And I think actually that the fact that it's multiracial and that they've been really, really holding their nerve at some of these quite tense matches is something that I think quite a lot of people can get behind. And so I think that that's a positive to take from this.
I couldn't agree more. I didn't realise how much I cared about football until the penalty shootout. But what's really good, I was on Twitter tweeting to and fro with people, and people were talking about, you know, what a decent man Gareth Southgate is, how this team are acting as a team. They're playing for each other. Gone are the days where we had superstars and everybody had to support them. They're playing as a team. And what's really pleasing to me, they didn't squeak through. No penalties, no 1-0.
All right.
They were better than the other team, and I really like that. And I know the closer they get to the final, the more excited we get. But it doesn't matter if they win or not, because they've conducted themselves really good. It makes you proud to be British. They played really well, especially against Colombia. There was a lot of jostling and pushing, and they never reacted to it. They really held up. And I sat with my 8-year-old boy and I said, look at the way they're behaving themselves on that pitch. It makes you proud.
There are a group of guys that you wouldn't mind your son kind of looking up to, aren't they? And good luck, England, in the semi-finals. Can't believe I've said that once again. Sean, lovely to see you. Cheers for being with us.
This week, Theresa May will hold yet another important meeting at Chequers when she hosts Donald Trump during his first UK visit since becoming president. He'll also visit the Queen at Windsor Castle in a visit that mainly keeps him away from London and the thousands of people who are expected to protest against his visit, as our reporter Greg Dawson has been finding out.
Donald Trump represents most of the things that are bad about society.
Hey guys, you're shooting yourselves in the foot. You may not like his style, but he matters to us.
Who's gonna pay for the wall? Who?
The UK should be honored to welcome President Donald J. Trump for this historic visit.
America first. America first.
I'll be out protesting, joining hundreds of thousands of people to reject the politics of bigotry and hatred.
This visit matters because the United States of America is our single most important ally and partner.
Important partner or not, in this South East London community centre, they're preparing the props for the most hostile of receptions for the US president. The anti-Trump campaigners believe hundreds of thousands will show up in London later this week to oppose the visit.
The response we've had from people has been overwhelming. That we're getting messages from people saying they're first-time protesters, they've never wanted to be involved in activism before, but this means so much to them.
Permission has even been granted to fly a giant angry baby Trump balloon over Parliament Square. Amusing for some, in poor taste for others. Drew Lickerman from Republicans Overseas has come along for a sneak preview of what's in store for his president.
I think it's a bit embarrassing when you have the leader of the free world coming to help make, both countries and people who live in both countries better off.
If the special relationship is us not standing up to Donald Trump like Theresa May didn't, if it's acquiescing and normalising his racism, then that's not acceptable. If it's accepting trade deals which will impoverish rich people, will privatise the NHS, then that's not the special relationship.
This protest seems to be more of lefty rabble-rousers out there just to get Trump.
Well, there you go, just a small taster of the strength of feeling about this visit. But amidst all the rows about the protests, it's easy to actually forget how important this meeting is for Theresa May.
A UK-US post-Brexit trade deal will be on the agenda, but some think the NATO summit earlier in the week will set the mood.
The bilateral meeting between Prime Minister May and President Trump will be in the shadow of a big discussion about the future of the transatlantic alliance, about security in Europe, about how to handle Putin. And the way in which this is going to be framed will, I think, be decided by the prior NATO meeting.
And Sir Christopher's key piece of advice for Theresa May, stop calling it the special relationship.
If you get seduced by the notion of a special relationship, you'll roll over like a puppy on its back and say, "Will you please tickle my tummy?" And this is, we cannot conduct foreign relations in that manner.
But there is one man who thinks he does have a special relationship with President Trump.
That was taken back in March.
Nigel Farage says don't expect a photo of the pair this week because he wouldn't want to get in the Prime Minister's way.
It is important that some better relationship, because let's be frank, it isn't very good, is established between the May government and the Trump government, and I wouldn't want to do anything that got in the middle of that.
So you won't be meeting him?
If he asks to meet me, I'll meet him, but I won't be going out of my way to do anything that would embarrass him.
No, you won't be on a golf course in Scotland?
I was 4 handicap once, but it's some time ago.
Well, my panel of political experts are still here with me to unpick what we might be able to expect from the Trump visit next week. Let's start with you, Don. We were talking about the potential protests there. How do you feel about the fact that there will be a lot of protests and that Trump probably won't see any of them?
I think it's a very, very good thing. A lot of people I know who don't normally go to a lot of protests, who aren't as politically engaged as some of us nerds here, are all going. They're very excited. They're bringing their families. I think the strength of feeling is very important. I think it's very, very important that we don't normalise Trump's presidency. And even if Trump doesn't see them in person, it's going to be absolutely impossible to escape the media coverage of it. Most of the media coverage will obviously not focus particularly on what Trump and May say, because they won't say very much, but it will focus on the huge numbers of people on the streets. So I think that those optics are really, really important.
Is it, I mean, we heard some people in the film there saying, respect the office even if you don't respect the man, and that it's not appropriate to behave like this when the President of the United States is visiting.
It would be appropriate if these people were also protesting where people like President Erdogan of Turkey comes, or Xi Jinping of China, and we didn't see this sort of scale of protest against those people who run what are effectively sort of pretty totalitarian regimes where, Donald Trump says horrible things about journalists, but he doesn't actually lock them up and have them murdered, for goodness sake. Not yet, anyway. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. I wouldn't have voted for him, but he was voted for by the majority in the United States. And I think we should respect that democratic decision, whether we agree with it or not. And people holding up a placard saying, "Stop Trump." What do you mean, stop Trump? He has a mandate to do a lot of the horrible things. He's a horrible man who said he'd do horrible things, and he's doing them. But he said he was going to do that, and that is what a democracy is all about. I think this is a lot of sort of lefty virtue signalling, and where has that got the left so far, especially in America? It seems to me that this serves no purpose other than to just embarrass our country. I'm all for people protesting, carry on, do what you need to, but it's not going to achieve anything other than embarrassing Theresa May.
Stephen?
Well, I think it's true that a protest in the United Kingdom is not going to dislodge Trump. However, I think there are things that people rightly find distasteful about Donald Trump. I think that, actually, as with Erdogan, it's a good example, right? They were both democratically elected, but there are things about their rule that are uniquely troubling and that may cause the end of democracy in their respective countries. I don't think the answer to why aren't you protesting Erdogan as well as Trump is to say, well, don't protest Trump. It's to say, look, if you're worried about Trump, you should be worried about Erdogan, and you should also be worried about...
It shows it's virtual signalling.
No, it shows that most people are not politically informed, and that they should be more angry and more worried about a variety of things. They should be worried about Erdogan. Frankly, they should be worried about the fact Esther McVey is still in post having lied to Parliament. Like, these are all part of the same troubling global trend of our democratic norms, and I think, you know, it is actually a really inspiring thing that people who aren't that political are going to go and march out against him.
Well, let's pick up on some of the substance of what's going to happen when he's in Europe. And as we heard in the film, he'll be going to the NATO summit first. We know a lot of European members of NATO do not meet the commitment of spending 2% of their GDP on defence. We do, although, of course, the MOD is pressing very hard for more money at the moment. Will Trump be pressuring the UK for more defence spending, Julia, as well as others?
I would have thought so. I mean, we meet the 2% target, but only by a whisker and by including pensions and things. I think on a technicality would be... But look, we're dealing with countries like Germany who don't even spend 1% of their GDP. I mean, they've got money for a fantastic healthcare and education system, but not for defence of their own country. I mean, I don't agree with Donald Trump on much, but he's quite right that under the NATO treaties, you know, these countries, I think it's Estonia, Poland and the UK are the only ones who meet these targets, should actually be fulfilling their duties. I don't see why we should rely on American taxpayers to fund the defence of Europe. We should be funding that. These countries are wealthy and can do so themselves. He's got every right to say that America should pull out if these countries don't fulfil their duty.
And having done that, he then appears in the UK. We know he's meeting the Queen, but also more importantly, the Prime Minister. What can the UK possibly expect out of this? I mean, there's talk of obviously a free trade deal once we've left the European Union. They're not going to sign that off right now, but what could be a win for Theresa May out of this?
I think what should happen and what Theresa May should focus on is, you know, exactly that, so looking at trade. And obviously Britain have a huge aerospace industry, and they're currently being hammered by trade tariffs in the US. So, you know, you have the Bombardier factory in Belfast has, you know, almost closed down because of US trade tariffs. That's happened even before we're going into Brexit. So Theresa May really, really does need to look at a lot of the tariffs on aerospace and other parts of British industry and manufacturing. I don't think she actually will. I think that, you know, if she can barely cope with her own cabinet. So I really don't think she'll manage to strong-arm Donald Trump, who is, you know, a loose cannon and pretty unreliable anyway.
And how, if what your prize is when you're trying to secure an excellent free trade deal with the US after we've left the European Union to show that Brexit was worth it, picking him up now on the tariffs that he's imposing on British and EU goods isn't going to be easy.
No, it's very difficult. I mean, I think what it shows is, regardless of how you feel about Brexit, setting whether or not we have a trade deal with the US, a traditionally difficult negotiating partner in trade deals, is lunacy, and she should just abandon the idea that that is a first priority for the United Kingdom after Brexit.
So what can she get out of it?
I think what she can get out of it is, to be honest, some photographs of her with the President of the United States, right? This is a man who is shown to be impervious to traditional diplomacy, and the UK should probably scale back its ambitions for this summit. Otherwise, it will end up embarrassed, just as Macron was after he rolled out the red carpet and got nothing in return.
And anyway, he's probably more interested in pictures of him playing golf at his Trump Turnberry course and advertising that than he necessarily is about the visits to Chequers or to meet the Queen.
No, meeting the Queen. That's the number one thing. It's Donald Trump getting something out of this. This is what he wants, is meeting the Queen.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, you know, I think no matter what happens, Trump will try and be impervious to any kind of political manoeuvring, any kind of political jibes. I think the protests will actually hurt him. He's shown himself to be very, very thin-skinned, very, very unhappy about criticism. So I think, you know, exactly that. You know, Macron went all in and got nothing out of it. Theresa May needs to accept she's weak.
All right. Well, thank you all. Julia, Stephen, Don, thanks for coming in.